Hello everyone and welcome to Cinderful Gaming. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe, and most of all fighting that war against the grey. Today we've got a wish listing video. This is going to be 10 things I'd like to see about Warhammer the Old World. The Old World is what many are saying is the new coming of Warhammer Fantasy. What it will be as a game we don't know yet, and we have very little details outside a couple of community articles talking about some Kislev units. There's not really anything else to go on, so anything other than that Kislev sort of slight reveals, if you would even call them, that is nothing but hearsay and rumour. However, I'm going to go through 10 things I'd like to see from Warhammer the Old World, and let's get cracking. The first one, I want this to be a new game. I played Warhammer Fantasy for many editions. I started in 4th, which was funnily known as Hero Hammer, 6th, and was probably my favourite time playing Warhammer Fantasy. 7th and 8th, I played a lot of it. Is probably my time where I played most of my Warhammer Fantasy in my local Games Workshop, as I got to that age where I started going out to Games Workshop and stuff like that. But I definitely think 6th I have the fondest memories of. It wasn't quite as wacky as 7th and 8th got, but it was still really cool. I think for a new game, we don't just want this to be Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition or 6th or 4th or 1st or whatever edition, just rehashed and put into some rules, because we know that doesn't work. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but what was Warhammer Fantasy didn't work in the end and wasn't profitable for Games Workshop to continue supporting. Now, you can say what you want about Games Workshop and all that, but they pulled the pin and they made a bold move to change the game to Age of Sigmar, which it is now, and Age of Sigmar is doing really well. I think we can learn some things from Age of Sigmar and also Warhammer 40k, which is having really great success at this current period as well, and learn from them. This doesn't mean we're going to play like a round-based game or anything like that, but there are certain aspects of those games that are potentially usable in a rank and flank system that we can take advantage of and use to better a rank and flank system and the game that was Warhammer Fantasy. I think this is incredibly important because many of us, I would like to play Warhammer Fantasy, but I feel like the nostalgia would wear off really quickly, where if it's a new game that I get to explore for new, it's likely to last and keep me entertained more so than a game I'm only going, I remember doing this and this and this. It's more likely to keep people into the game, and that's a really important thing. I did some polls on a few of the Facebook groups for Warhammer the Old World, as well as Twitter and some other stuff, and trying to get where people are coming from in this and what the Warhammer Old World community is going to sort of look like. So I put down things like, okay, are you coming from obviously old Warhammer Fantasy? Do you still play that? Do you play alternate games that sort of filled the void in the end, which was Ninth Age and Kings of War? Did you just move on to Age of Sigmar? Did you go to Warhammer 40k, so stay within Games Workshop but choose the other game system? Or are you someone who supports Lord of the Rings and 30k, which is a forward world system? The results were probably as expected for me anyway. There was a high part of old Warhammer Fantasy players that just kept playing what they play. There was a very high portion of Warhammer Age of Sigmar fans within the groups, and this to me just says a lot of people just moved on from the game system, but are interested to go back to the nostalgic roots, which is really good. There was a lot of Warhammer 40k, so obviously people who never got the chance maybe to play fantasy, they're always maybe I'll jump over and never did, or those that used to play fantasy moved to Games Workshop's other game. There was also a decent amount of 30k and Lord of the Rings fans, and as well as other specialist game, which is interesting because those people generally support Forge World, so it's interesting will they support the next thing Forge World does. They're a community that perhaps their game is maybe winding to an end in 30k. The storyline is coming to an end, so we'll see where that goes. And then, actually, quite surprisingly, the smallest portion of the community is actually Ninth Age and Kings of War. I suspect those people are actually happy with the games they've got now, which is fine. But from what I gathered from asking a bunch of questions and some polls and a whole bunch of different stuff over the groups, was that the vast majority of the community is actually already Games Workshop customers. So like many communities that Games Switch forward, it's actually going their existing customers, and maybe we're going to bring some of those old Warhammer Fantasy fans back as well, because they were probably the second largest portion, and the smallest portion being Ninth Age and Kings of War fans. None of those fans are wrong in anything on what they do. Like, you like what game you like, and that's fine. I like what games I like, and you like what games you like, and there's nothing wrong, and you should never berate someone for liking a different game than you. They're just having fun. So, keeping that in mind, that's sort of where I base my thoughts in that. Right, that's the community we've got. So that's where a lot of my next sort of points are going to come from. Because I think me wanting something that's, if I go, I want Warhammer Fantasy 2nd edition and I don't want any other edition, if it's not that, I'm not happy. That's a really bad way to go into this, because you just don't know anything at this point. So I'm trying to go in with as much an open mind as possible with all of these points. And if any of these are not right, then I'm okay with that, because I'm going to approach this with the whole thing of, like, at the very minimum, this is some nostalgia for me, going back to a game that I grew up with and I loved when I played. So, point number 2, and they're already hitting on this point for me, and I want to see it driven home more, and it's explore corners that were never fully explored in the time of Warhammer Fantasy. It was only really in 8th edition that a lot of the corners of the world were being filled in, and even then there were vast swaths of area that we knew what existed there but never saw models for it, and they just never saw the light of day come out of it. We obviously like even things like Norska, where all we know is Marauders, and that's the only models we really got, but we know there's so much more there, to the Border Princes, Tilly, Estilla, even like things like, let's have a look. Trying to think of like the Badlands and Khemri, like, and Araby and all that sort of stuff, and like even the Amazons, and like they just never got fully explored. I want to see these factions, like, along with I want to see classic factions without a doubt. And I think because the classic factions are what going to sell the most of the game, but these other factions as well are going to drag in other people, or people who really like that, like, little tiny bit that they never got to fully explore it. I think that's really important. And continuing on this with my third point is, I want to see the return of Regiments of Renown. These were amazing things in Warhammer Fantasy, the Regiments of Renown, from Scarlock and the Lost Kindred to Lumpenkroot and his fighting cocks, to Golfags, Man-Eaters, and so many more. I think there's a lot of potential with the Regiment of Renown to really tell some stories and really delve into those Regiment of Renown, because most of them we don't know much about, except like small, very short blurbs and narrative about them, and it'd be really cool to delve into that narrative for them as well. Point number 4, and this is the model thing, and this is what I'm most looking forward to. We don't know what the models for the game will be like, whether it will be 28mm or potentially more 38mm like Age of Sigmar is sort of now, or potentially is it going to be a War Master-esque sort of smaller scale game. I do think the more I'm seeing pictures and the more I'm seeing what they're showing inspiration of, that we're going to get a 28 to 32mm scale game. I think War Master seems to be just, it doesn't seem to be fitting for me. Not that I'd be upset if it was, but for me, I think the coolest thing for this would be if we got a character series for Warhammer the Old World like we have for Warhammer 30,000. For those who don't know what that is, they've effectively taken the characters and they've given them nice scenic bases. The Primarchs are included in this, as well as other notable characters, and they've given them cool scenic bases and really gone to town making the sculpts as nice as possible. I think something like this for Warhammer Fantasy would be great. Imagine seeing like a brand new model for like Warhammer the Old World, like, so for like Tyrion or Teclis or Thanquol, or many others of those characters would be really cool to see. Even characters that we didn't necessarily have models for back in Warhammer Fantasy, like the Red Duke or Boris Todbringer, or I don't know, let's look at like Ariel or Mazamundi, and characters like that. I really think that would be cool to see in a character series, and Warhammer Fantasy had so many of them, like this series could go on for a while. Point number 5. I want the game to start small and focus on the old world to begin with. Now, that's not to say I never want to see things like Lustria or Araby or the hinterlands of Kuresh or Nippon or Cathay, but I think starting in the old world and focusing on that and filling that out first is probably going to be the best way to go. Fill out the Empire, put Bretonnia, put Wood Elves, so you've got elves in the game, you've got dwarves, you can put Chaos in, you've got Kislev, obviously we know is coming, you've got these basic factions in there, and I think you've got a good game to start with. If you try to print out rules for every army to begin with, it's not going to be good. It'll feel clunky and clogged, and you just can't playtest that much to begin with. I think what they did for Warhammer 30k, where they only brought out, the original legions to start with, where they only brought out Emperor's Children, Sons of Horus, and Death Guard to begin with, was a really smart move, and adding legions further down the line was a great way to sort of expand the game. If we bring everything out all at once, the game has no potential to expand that much, and we end up very much like we were in Warhammer Fantasy, where everything's explored, but nothing is actually really explored. What I mean by that is that every army's got a book, every army's got rules and models, but because we're now having to keep the balance and keep balancing all this sort of stuff, we're not able to actually fully delve into something new, and it's really hard to add new armies entirely into the game at that point. Point number 6, though, I think this is important. Now, I've mentioned that a large portion of the community is already Games Workshop customers, so models to be cross-compatible with Age of Sigmar. I think this is a really important thing because this means that more sales are going to be made. By making models cross-compatible and giving them rules in Age of Sigmar, you're going to have them make more sales, which is good for Warhammer the Old World. 30k did this really well, where it started printing out rules for 40k, and it's without a doubt the best way to go for doing this. It's why I don't really think the War Muster thing works, because becoming its own self-contained, smaller scale game means it's just that. There's no outside influence being able to come into it. So I think making the models cross-compatible with Age of Sigmar is very important. Now, what this means for basing is an issue, because obviously we know we want square bases for this, or that's what they're promising us. So it's got me thinking, are we going to see base slots, maybe and even characters on base slots, because there's games out there like that. I don't know if anyone has seen maybe the Rune Wars game that Fantasy Flight Games sort of failed at. We'll say that it's not doing well. However, even their characters are on round bases, but they slot into these squares, which is really cool. Maybe we'll see something like that, like Song of Ice and Fire, War of the Ring. Point number 7, though, I want to see the slot-based force organization come back. Now, I think a big problem at the end of Warhammer Fantasy was that they changed over to the percentage system for how they did things. While this allowed you to freely mix heroes and lords, which was a really cool aspect, this also meant you had to put a certain amount of points into your core, which for some armies meant you were putting a lot of models needed. For Skaven, it meant you were taking like 80 or more clan rats because you just didn't have a choice. And I think the potential with slots instead is to take minimum size core units, and this allows you, if you don't want to take your core units that many times, to take minimum size, fill up your slots, and then spend more points in your special and rare units. That's if that sort of system is going to be used at all, but I think the slot-based system works better for allowing people more freedom in what they want to do than a percentage-based system. Number 8. Now, something that Age of Sigmar has done really well is bring in terrain to the game and make terrain have an effect on the game. I think during Warhammer Fantasy, there was a lot of times where terrain was cumbersome, and so it was just not used a lot in Warhammer Fantasy. I want to see them make terrain usable in games, but also, I don't want to go to 2D terrain. That is horrible, and I never want to see 2D terrain on my tables, but make terrain work within the game. Now, we can do this by having smaller, if we are going to do like the movement trades, you can do like 6 models on a base, and then all of a sudden that becomes easy to move through a forest, even if like you have to break up the unit like 6 models and they can fit in between the forest and all that different part. I think that's the way to go. Terrain needs to have an effect on the game. Make your board part of the game, because if it's just there, it's just a background you can play on the floor, and it. Point number 9 I want to make is I really want a heavy narrative focused rules. I like when rules represent what this model does in the story. I think some points from like Age of Sigmar that is doing this really well at the moment is there's a lot of narrative put into the rules that they do. I really like when rules are done like this because it allows you to tell that story on the table that much better. And my last point for today is give me goddamn Wood Elves. I am a Wood Elf player through and through. They were the army I ran from the 2006 release all the way up to the end of Warhammer Fantasy. I also have some Skaven there, but Wood Elves are like my big love. I like Wood Elves that much. My son is named Orion, to put into context of how much I like this army. But I want to see some new Wood Elf models. I want to see some of my old classic Wood Elf favourites come back, like Warhawk Riders and War Dancers and Way Watchers, Treekin, and even like all the different like variations like the Kindreds and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I think that's enough rambling about Warhammer the Old World today. I'd like to know what you would like to see from this game, and try and keep an open mind when we're thinking about what we want with this game, because that's the best way to go forward. There's going to be a lot of people coming from different games to come over to this game, and everyone's going to want something different, I understand, but it's most important that you keep an open mind because we really know very little about this game at all. So anyway, hope you're all doing well. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stay safe everyone, stay well, and most of all keep fighting that war against the Grey. I'll see you all later.